Good evening, everyone. Welcome. We are in the Divided Kingdom class. We'll be in 2 Chronicles 24 here. We talked about this on Sunday. We're talking about King Joash, who was the son of Athaliah, who we talked about as the only queen in the history, or at least ruling queen, rather, and how awful she was. Remember that Joash was hidden from her wrath when her husband was killed. She went on a murderous spree and said, well, I'm going to kill all the sons too, and no one will be left. And Joash was hidden away as a baby, around 1 year old. And so he becomes king at 7 years old. He reigns 40 years. He's also called Jehoash in 2 Kings. His mother is Zibiah of Beersheba. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord all the days of Jehoiada, who is a priest, and he essentially raised him. His wife is the one was Jehoshabeath, and I'm sorry if I'm butchering her name. I apologize. I'm by no means a scholar of names, but she hides Joash, and this is her husband, the priest, and bring him up, hide him in the temple in like a spare storeroom, and hide him, and then they make him king. He's king. He does what was right all the days that Jehoiada is alive. And in fact, he does good things. He reinstates the temple tax and starts repairing and restoring it, because it looks like Athaliah and her sons had broken into the house of God, and it was in disrepair. So it's not necessarily that it had just fallen apart through like the house at the end of the street that no one's lived in for years and years and years, and it's all decrepit and maybe haunted. Thank you. That's all. The one that you're scared to walk past when you're a little kid. That's not like this in the temple. They actually went in and they're like, what is not nailed down that we can take and make into different idols? So anyway, Joash is fixing up the temple, and then Jehoiada is buried with the kings at 130 years old. And if we look at all these kings, like Joash will be 47 when he moves off this mortal coil. So the kings aren't long-lived, but this priest lives 130 years. And I think that's a grace of God situation, that he was such a righteous man. And that's all review, hopefully. And we'll be moving on in the reign of Joash. So we find Jehoiada dies in 15 and 16, and they bury him in the city of David among the kings, just like Austin pointed out, that this was a special honor for this man who's not a king, but he's buried with the kings. He had such a good influence. And then we pick up the reading in verses 17 through 19 of 2 Chronicles 24. Anybody want to read this? No weird names, just a couple of verses. This is your time to strike. David. Oh, never mind. John beat you. We'll get you some names, David. Don't you worry, buddy.
Now after the death of Jehoiada, the princes of Judah came and paid homage to the king. Then the king listened to them, and they abandoned the house of the Lord, the God of their fathers, and served the Asherim and the idols. And wrath came upon Judah and Jerusalem for this guilt of theirs. Yet he sent prophets among them to bring them back to the Lord. These testified against them, but they would not pay attention.
Thank you, John. So, I don't know how soon this is after Jehoiada dies, but these princes of Judah come in and they start influencing the king. And this reminds me strongly of the Rehoboam situation at the very beginning of the kingdom of Judah, that he's got these old counselors that were kind of contemporary with Solomon. And they said, you should be cool to the people. Rehoboam lightened the tax load that Solomon laid, because Solomon laid heavy taxes on them to fund armies and the temple and all kinds of things. And then Rehoboam listened to those old men and said, your counsel is wise, old men. I will follow this. No, that's not what he did at all. It's the opposite of that. He listened to his buddies, the young men, the young princes, and they said, you should go hard on these people. You should show them who's boss. And then that's why we have the separation of the kingdoms. So this is just like Joash. Joash had a great influence with Jehoiada the priest, and then as soon as he dies, these other princes move in and start dragging him down. They're like, you've been very zealous for the Lord, but you should also be zealous for Asherah. She's kind of cool too. And he was like, all right then. And so he goes and they abandon the house of the Lord, all the work that he's done. And then the wrath comes on, and God sends prophets among them to bring them back. And they testified against him, but they weren't paying attention. And we read in other places of them killing prophets. And we read that when we covered Elijah, that they're killing these prophets. And I alone am left, is what Elijah told the Lord. And it only gets worse from here. How about 20 through 22 in 2 Chronicles 24? Just invent some names, David.
Then the Spirit of God clothed Zechariah, the son of Jehoiada, the priest, and he stood above the people and said to them, Thus says God, why do you break the commandments of the Lord so that you cannot prosper? Because you have forsaken the Lord, he has forsaken you. But they conspired against him, and by command of the king they stoned him with stones in the court of the house of the Lord. Thus Joash the king did not remember the kindness that Jehoiada, Zechariah's father, had shown him, but killed his son. And when he was dying, he said, May the Lord see and avenge.
So here, not only is he condoning idol worship, he is murdering the priests for bringing a prophecy against him. He says, why do you break the commandment? Or not even a prophecy, he's asking them to come back to the Lord. Why do you break the commandments of the Lord so that you cannot prosper? Because you've forsaken the Lord, he has forsaken you. And they're like, we've had enough of you, Zechariah. And they stone him to death by the king's command. So remember, Jehoiada hid Joash and basically raised him. So this is like his older brother, I would guess. And he's just having none of it. And Charles Spurgeon, who is a old commentator from way back, he wrote that all that Joash had done was to give his heart to Jehoiada, not to Jehovah. And I think that's an important delineation. He further writes, it's very easy to be outwardly religious by giving your heart to your mother or your father, your aunt or your uncle, or some good person who helps you to do what is right. You're doing all of this out of love to them, which is at best a very secondary motive. God says, my son, give me thine heart. And I know Andrew's been in my class in KL too. If ever I teach you as a junior high or high school, this is one of my soapboxes, is that my faith is not going to save Andrew. And if you don't know Andrew, Andrew is my oldest son. My faith will not save Andrew. It can influence him, hopefully for the good, but he's got to have his own faith. And that's what I tell all the kids when I get to be their teacher. You need to find your own faith. You need to ground yourself. This needs to be real for you so that you can go through this life. Ephraim?
That dialogue or statement that you just made is just really thought-provoking, and it reminds me of something that Donna and I used to hear when we were in West Palm Beach, Florida, at a congregation there. And this elder used to say that God has no grandchildren. Mm-hmm. He only has children.
Indeed. Anybody else? So moving on, we start reading about some of that judgment, some of that what forsaking the Lord has brought upon Judah. So in 23, 4, and 5, at the end of the year, the army of the Syrians came up against Joash. They came to Judah and Jerusalem and destroyed all the princes of the people from among the people, and sent all their spoil to the king of Damascus. Though the army of the Syrians had come with few men, the Lord delivered into their hand a very great army, because Judah had forsaken the Lord, the God of their fathers. Thus, they executed judgment on Joash. That's the Syrian army, when they had departed from him, leaving him severely wounded, his servants conspired against him, because the blood of the son of Jehoiada, the priest, and killed him on his bed. So he died, and they buried him in the city of David, but they did not bury him in the tombs of the kings. And we'll just read on through the end of the chapter. Did not bury him in the tombs of the kings. Those who conspired against him were Zabad, the son of Shimeath the Ammonite, and Jehozabad, the son of Shimrith the Moabite. Accounts of his sons and the many oracles against him and of the rebuilding of the house of God are written in the story of the book of Kings, and Amaziah his son reigned in his place. So, just like Zechariah had told Joash, because you have forsaken the Lord, you cannot prosper. You cannot prosper because you have forsaken the Lord. He has forsaken you. And now the Syrian army comes, and they kill all the princes who have led Joash astray, and then they start taking all their stuff. They're taking all the spoil. Even though Judah had the superior army according to the scripture. That didn't matter because, hang on, let me pull all this up. This is why I'm bad at PowerPoint. Because the Lord delivered into their hands. So the Lord gave Judah to Syria here because of the wickedness of Joash, because he had forsaken the Lord. And then his servants killed Joash in his bed because of the blood of Zechariah. They're like, this man was a priest of God, and you murdered him in the courtyard of the temple. Stand back here. And then finally they bury him in the city of David, but didn't give him the honor of being in the tombs of the kings. So any comments, questions on the storied reign of Joash? Go ahead, Austin.
There are kind of a few things that I all like that come together at the end of Joash's reign. So when we talk about Syria coming in as judgment, verse 24 of that chapter says, the Syrians come with few men, yet slaughter the very great army of Judah. And I really like how that's the exact opposite of what we saw Judah doing to other nations in the past when they had righteous kings, when I can't remember what nation it was, but one of the nations came up with like 1 million men and some chariots.
Yeah, the Ethiopians came up.
And Judah not really Judah, but God on behalf of Judah just wiped them out and sent them home. And Judah won because it was faithful, but here it's the opposite. And so the Syrians come in with a small amount of troops and just totally wipe them out. And then another point that I wanted to make was just, you kind of referenced this, but we talked about Jehoiada got the special honor of being buried in the tombs of the kings, and the actual king did not get buried in the tombs of the kings.
Right.
And I think that's a pretty clear demarcation of, okay, the people really like Jehoiada and they didn't like Joash, and I think it correlates to Joash going his own way after Jehoiada died, and he didn't have that influence in his life that he had wrongly prioritized anymore.
Right. Anybody else? All right, and then we will move on. Chapter 25. It's kind of cool that each king seems to get their own chapter. I guess maybe when they're breaking it up into chapters, they thought that was a good thing. So we've got Amaziah in 1 Chronicles, verse 1. Amaziah was 25 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Jehoaddan of Jerusalem. And he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, yet not with a whole heart. So that's interesting. Sorry, I don't know why it's doing that. Maybe that'll work. Let's try that. So yet not with a whole heart. And as soon as the royal power, verse 3, as soon as the royal power was firmly his, he killed his servants who had struck down the king, his father. But he did not put their children to death, according to what was written in the law in the book of Moses, where the Lord commanded, fathers shall not die because of their children, nor children die because of their fathers, but each one shall die for his own sin. which is found in Deuteronomy 24:16. So it's interesting that normally we have the good king and the bad king, and here we have a king who's like middle of the road. He did some good, but his heart wasn't in it. And I think we'll find that that is not quite acceptable either. And then we'll go 5 and 6. Amaziah assembled the men of Judah and sent them by their fathers' houses under commanders of the thousands and hundreds for all of Judah and Benjamin. Remember that Judah and Benjamin is basically the kingdom of Judah. He mustered those 20 years old and upward and found there were 300,000 choice men fit for war, able to handle the spear and shield. He hired also 100,000 mighty men of valor from Israel for 100 talents of silver. What happened there? Okay, that was okay, good. You took out my mistake. It's still on my notes, but anyways, that's neither here nor there now. So, not with the whole heart. He has a pretty sizable army, but also hires 100,000 mercenaries from Israel. And we'll see that that comes with a price as well. Pretty straightforward, but anybody have anything to say so far? Comments, questions, concerns? Let's keep reading. In 2 Chronicles 25, verse 7. So he hires the men of Israel for 100 talents of silver, but a man of God came to him and said, O king, do not let the army of Israel go with you. For the Lord is not with Israel, with all these Ephraimites, but go, act, be strong for the battle. Why should you suppose that God will cast you down before the enemy? For God has the power to help or to cast down. And Amaziah said to the man of God, But what shall we do about the 100 talents that I have given to the army of Israel? The man of God answered, The Lord is able to give you much more than this. Then Amaziah discharged the army that had come to him from Ephraim to go home again. And they became very angry with Judah and returned home in fierce anger. But Amaziah took courage and led out his people and went to the valley of Salt and struck down 10,000 men of Seir, which is Edom. The men of Judah captured another 10,000 alive and took them to the top of a rock and threw them down from the top of the rock, and they were all dashed to pieces. But the men of the army whom Amaziah sent back, not letting them go with him to battle, raided the cities of Judah from Samaria to Beth-horon, struck down 3,000 people in them, and took much spoil. So here we see the result of this. So the man of God comes up to him and says, Don't take those mercenaries from Israel. Don't take them with you. The Lord is not with them. Not with that army. And I really like this. He's like, what about my money? I already paid these guys. What am I going to do about that? And the answer is, the Lord's able to give you much more than this. That's nothing to the Lord. Don't worry. Yeah, you might be crying over that spilled milk, but that's nothing for the Lord. He'll give you much more. And he sends Israel home angry. Or the mercenaries. They go home and they're mad. Why would they be mad? They got paid. They came to fight because Delilah says, and she's exactly right, because when you fight, and especially when you win, like we read when the Syrians came up and they defeated Judah, what did they take back to Damascus? Much spoil. Everything that wasn't nailed down, and probably a handful of people that weren't nailed down. And that's why you fight as a mercenary. We'll be paid, and we'll also get paid in the plunder. And that has been the case for a long time in our history. So that's exactly right. That's why they're mad. They're like, hey, we were going to fight, and we're pretty good at fighting. So we were wagering that we'd win, and we'd be even more rich by reading whoever you told us to go raid. Yeah, that's exactly why they're mad. But sends them home, goes and fights Edom, which is to the south-ish and southeast of Judah. had to think about the map and then go left, right. Yeah, that's me. But while they're there, while they're fighting these guys, the mercenaries, while they're leaving, be like, oh, we're going to take the towns while the army's away. And they strike down 3,000 people, so those people were just living their lives, and they paid for the mistake of this king. Nope, we're not that far yet. Any questions so far? Go ahead, Austin.
We talked a few classes ago about how Jehoshaphat had the army of over 1 million men. It was like 1,160,000 or whatever, plus the garrison troops. And now we're seeing that the army of Judah is 300,000 or so. And one of the things I really like about the exchange where Amaziah says, what about my money? And the prophet says, the Lord is able to give you much more than this. I wonder if Amaziah knew his country's history and knew the army had been bigger at one point. I wonder if he ever thought, not only could God give me a whole bunch of money, but he could give me a much bigger army so I wouldn't have to hire these mercenaries. I'm just curious if he ever put two and two together on that.
I don't know. We've talked before about Egypt, how they kind of erased the history of whoever was before them. And that might have been the case, especially with Athaliah trying to wipe out the entire line of David. But yeah, I don't know if they were, your grandfather David, he did this and that, and Jehoshaphat, he did this and that. I don't know, there was hearing these tales of the Lord providing. And so just when you were talking about the money and how he was worried about that, I forgot to make my own points here. That Amaziah heard and understood the word of God from his messenger, but the question's familiar. How much is it going to cost me to be obedient? And that's not an awful question to ask. I think that's something we all have to weigh ourselves. I remember asking the kids, the three of my kids have been baptized. I was like, you need to think this through. This isn't getting dunked so you can taste the grape juice every Sunday morning. That's not what this is about. This is a lifelong commitment, and you need to consider the cost of this obedience. And I think that's something we need to weigh over and over again when we're making decisions. This obedience is going to cost me maybe a friendship, maybe some family, I don't know, whatever it is. But you have to count that cost and then be willing to pay because the Lord can give you much more than this. Whatever obedience costs, it's always ultimately cheaper than disobedience to God. And I stole all of this from David Guzik. There's a website I use, and it's an app also called Blue Letter Bible, and he's one of the commentators on there, and most of his stuff I really like. So, good job, David, whoever you are. Anything else? All right, we're moving on to 14 through 16. And this is a narrative, so if someone wants to volunteer to read that, I won't steal all the thunder of reading this time. Ephraim? 14 through 16 of 2 Chronicles 25.
Now it was so, after Amaziah came from the slaughter of the Edomites, that he brought the gods of the people of Seir, set them up to be his gods, and bowed down before them, and burned incense to them. Therefore the anger of the Lord was aroused against Amaziah, and he sent him a prophet who said to him, "Why have you sought the gods of the people, which could not rescue their own people from your hand?" So it was, as he talked with him, that the king said to him, "Have we made you the king's counselor? Cease. Why should you be killed?" Then the prophet ceased and said, "I know that God has determined to destroy you, because you have done this and have not heeded my advice."
Thank you, Ephraim. So he goes and has this victory over Edom. Those are some nice idols. I should take those. I should worship those. That sounds like a good time. I assume is what his internal monologue is. And this prophet comes, the Lord sends him to say, why are you worshiping the gods of a people that you just slaughtered? That God couldn't save those people from you. Why do you think that bowing and sacrificing and praying or whatever to these gods is going to help you at all? And before we go into the answer, I think with all the kings, I think the entire thing, all of the idols, is we're going to cover all our bases. If you remember when Israel is allowed to return from Babylonian captivity when the Persians take over, and Nehemiah is like, I want to go back. And he's like, yes, go. Go and take anything you need and make sure that you pray to your God for me in Persia so that I'll be a good king, or that I will be fruitful as a king. So that's the way Persia looked at it. I think that's the way all of them look at it. The more gods I can get on my side, the more mighty I will be. And didn't even fathom that, okay, we just utterly destroyed these guys enough that we could pitch them off of rocks, or pitch them off of cliffs down to the rocks for torturous good times. That, yes, I'm going to take those gods too. And then rather than saying, wow, you're absolutely right, that was foolish of me, they were like, the king says, have we made you a counselor? You better shut your mouth before I shut it for you. Like, we could kill you just as easily. And the prophet stops. He's like, fine, I'm not saying another word. But I know that, this is his last word to the king. He says, I know that God is determined to destroy you because you have done this and you have not listened to me. So we see throughout this class, when the kings listen to God, great things happen. When the kings follow God, great things happen. It's just like Austin's point a little while ago. Why can't they take out the book of the Kings and be like, hey, let's read about some of these prosper times. Great things were going on during Jehoshaphat's reign. What did he do that I could maybe mimic and be a great king too? They didn't seem to do that. God will destroy you because you have not listened. Any comments? Questions, concerns? Everybody's taciturn tonight. I expect you to be much more open on Sunday then. All right, continuing on with Amaziah. We've covered this a little bit when we talked about Joash of Israel. Verse 17. We'll just read through the end, since there's names and weird stuff. Then Amaziah, king of Judah, took counsel and sent to Joash, the son of Jehoahaz, son of Jehu, king of Israel. So this Joash is different than the ones we were just talking about. He is the king of Israel. And he says, come, let us look one another in the face. And if you remember, that means like, if you're feeling froggy, jump. Come face me in battle. You can't handle this. And Joash, verse 18, Joash the king of Israel sent word to Amaziah king of Judah, saying, a thistle on Lebanon sent to a cedar on Lebanon, saying, give your daughter to my son for a wife. And a wild beast of Lebanon passed by and trampled down the thistle. You say, see, I have struck down Edom, and your heart has lifted you up in boastfulness, but now stay at home. Why should you provoke trouble so that you fall, you and Judah with you? So we talked a little bit about this before, but I love this answer. I love the little image of a thistle, a little weed flower coming up to this mighty cedar tree. I mean, like, we're equals, so let's pair up our children and unite these noble houses in a fruitful alliance. And then just a wild beast comes down and completely just walking by tramples the thistle, and it's no longer here. He says, yeah, you beat up Edom. That's not a big deal. You don't need to fight us because you're going to fall, you and Judah with you. And then picking up anything else about this answer from the king of Israel. Quite sage advice from this man. But verse 20, but Amaziah would not listen. So we're seeing that recurring theme with Amaziah. Would not listen, for it was of God, in order that he might give them into the hand of their enemies, because they had sought the gods of Edom. So Joash, king of Israel, went up. He and Amaziah, king of Judah, faced one another in a battle at Beth Shemesh, which belongs to Judah. And Judah was defeated by Israel, and every man fled to his home. And Joash, king of Israel, captured Amaziah, king of Judah, the son of Joash, son of Ahaziah, at Beth Shemesh, and brought him to Jerusalem, and broke down the wall of Jerusalem for 400 cubits, from the Ephraim gate to the corner gate. And he seized all the gold and silver, and all the vessels that were found in the house of God in the care of Obed-Edom. He seized also the treasures of the king's house, also hostages, and he returned to Samaria. So here we see that God is tired of Amaziah, that he gives victory to Israel. Remember, at the beginning of this, when he hired the mercenaries from Israel, he's like, God's not with them. Don't do this. And he sends them home. That's the only time he listens. And then now, maybe that's why they thought he could destroy them. And God says, no. You brought those Edomite idols, and now I am not with you. And so he is utterly defeated by Israel, so much that they come all the way back to Jerusalem, break the wall down for 600 feet from the Ephraim gate to the corner gate, and then takes gold and silver and all the vessels that are in the temple, and then raids the king's own house, and then takes hostages. So prisoners, slaves, whatever. Like all the royal family, you're coming with us. We won, so you belong to us now. So this is a complete turnaround here. And then reading on through the end of the chapter, Amaziah, verse 25. Amaziah, the son of Joash, king of Judah, lived 15 years after the death of Joash, the son of Jehoahaz, king of Israel. Now the rest of the deeds of Amaziah from first to last, are they not written in the book of kings of Judah and Israel? From the time they turned away from the Lord, they made a conspiracy against him in Jerusalem, and he fled to Lachish. But they sent after him to Lachish and put him to death there. And they brought him up on horses, and he was buried with his fathers in the city of David. So he's kind of living in house arrest, exile, whatever, while Joash, of the son of Jehoahaz, is king of Israel. And then he, I guess, becomes king again. That's what it looks like. And then he is overthrown in Lachish, which is a fortified city in Judah, and then buried in the city of David. So he's, there's a conspiracy against him in Jerusalem in verse 27, runs to Lachish, and they go after him, and they kill him there. So it's just not a good time for him. We're seeing here a lot like the end of the kingdom of Israel, that the kings are just turning over right and left because of all their sins, and they're getting murdered and replaced, and it's just not a good time to be a king during this particular era. Any comments, questions about Amaziah?
Sorry for talking so much.
No, take it.
One of the things I think is interesting here is in the whole exchange between Amaziah and Joash, there's no mention of God. Neither king references God at all. But I think the important takeaway is verse 20 says, but Amaziah doesn't listen because that was God's plan. Right. And I think we should be encouraged by that today, because there's so much wickedness and sin going on like everywhere you look. But we know God is still doing exactly what he wants to do, even though it's really hard for us to see.
Right. And I know we give, especially if we're talking about bad king after bad king after bad king, we give them an appropriate hard time, but I think we get caught up in our lives probably the same way as they did. You start not being able to see the forest for the trees. I heard that my entire life, and it wasn't until I was well into adulthood that I understood what that meant, that you get so focused on what you're doing, on what is near at hand, that you can't take the big picture. Big picture, sorry. And I think that's them. They're so worried about holding on to power and keeping everybody happy, listening to their buddies who are the princes. So they're like, okay, God's going to take a back seat. And then as time goes on, he gets so far in the rearview mirror, they're like, I guess Baal will do, or whoever they find. So I think you're exactly right, Austin. That's a brilliant point. Anything further? Second Chronicles 26. Uzziah. And all the people of Judah took Uzziah, who was 16 years old, and made him king instead of his father Amaziah. He built Eloth and restored it to Judah after the king slept with his fathers. Uzziah was 16 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 52 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Jechaliah of Jerusalem, and he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, according to all that his father Amaziah had done. He set himself to seek God in the days of Zechariah, who had instructed him in the fear of God. As long as he sought the Lord, God made him prosper. First 5 verses, and make sure I bring all that up. So it's fairly young. I don't think that's as young as we would consider 16 in these days, especially, like we said, they're dying at 47, which is how old I am. Sobering thought. But becomes king at 16 and then reigns 52 years. This is a pretty lengthy reign. I think it's second longest. And then he's also called Azariah, and he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, set himself to seek God, and he prospers as long as he seeks God. And then because I was trying to figure out who this Zechariah was, and Zechariah is a very common name. So it's important not to just be like, Zechariah, that's going to be the same guy who wrote the book of Zechariah, and that other guy that we just read about, and there's another one in Ezra and Nehemiah, I think. So some think that this was the son of the Zechariah who Joash slew, and that this Zechariah was the one that had understanding in visions of God, and that he had great influence with Uzziah. And this is Matthew Henry's commentary, fairly famous commentary. And he says, happy are the great men who have such about them a good advisor and are willing to be advised by them, but unhappy those who seek God only while they have such with them and not have principle to bear them out to the end. So that's kind of the older English to say that they only seek God while these guys are around, just like we saw with while Jehoiada was alive, everything was fine, and then when he wasn't. So this is the opposite in the days of Zechariah. There is a strike against him that he did not remove the high places, and that is in 2 Kings 15:4. But none of the other kings did that either. When we get through this lesson, the next king, in the next lesson, there's one king that goes to the high places and starts taking those down. So we can't hold too much against him that he did not remove the high places, because neither did any of the other good kings. They were tearing down Asherahs and Baals, but they weren't going up to those high places and cleaning them out. And high places are just places of worship on top of a hill, because I think a lot of times we think the same thing. Once you get on top of a mountain, you're that much nearer to God, which I think you can appreciate the beauty in creation and the awesome majesty of God without thinking, I'm physically near him, so we're that much closer. But it's neither here nor there. Not a whole lot to think about here, but questions, comments? Set himself to seek God? Let's see. Moving on then. In verse 6, He went out and made war against the Philistines and broke through the wall of Gath and the wall of Jabneh and the wall of Ashdod. All of those are Philistine cities. And he built cities in the territory of Ashdod and elsewhere among the Philistines. God helped him against the Philistines and against the Arabians who lived in Gurubal and against the Maonites. And then it was really bothering me who the Maonites were, so I looked it up. And this is from the Jewish Virtual Library website. And it says the Maonites are an Arab tribe that lived on the border of the kingdom of Judah. And there's an inscription of the Assyrian king Tiglath-Pileser III that indicates that about this time, the 8th century BC, the Maonites lived near Egypt. So anyway, it's an Arab tribe. And they're defeated by Uzziah. And then verse 8, the Ammonites paid tribute to Uzziah, and his fame spread even to the border of Egypt, for he became very strong. So this is all with God's help, as we have seen. The Ammonites are bringing tribute. Every time we see somebody bringing tribute, it's because you recognize that that kingdom is stronger than you, and you're paying them to not kill you. And we see that with all the alliances with Syria and Assyria. We'll see it with Babylon when they come calling that you pay tribute to make them leave you alone. So the Ammonites are like, Uzziah is going on a rampage. Nobody beats the Philistines, and he's built cities on their cities. So this guy's the real deal. And his fame extends all the way to Egypt. So all the way through that tribe that was in between them. Comments, questions, concerns? Moving on then. Verse 9 in 2 Chronicles 26, verse 9. Moreover, Uzziah built towers in Jerusalem at the corner gate and at the valley gate and at the angle and fortified them. And he built towers in the wilderness and cut out many cisterns, for he had large herds. Large herds both in the Shephelah and in the plain, and he had farmers and vine dressers in the hills and in the fertile lands, for he loved the soil. Stop there for a second. So he fortifies Jerusalem. Remember in the last king that Israel comes down and they break down the wall for 600 feet. So that's not good. It's not just a beauty wall. It's not like you ruined a park. The walls were of the utmost importance in these times for cities. If you had a wall, you were safe. If anybody came along and you were on the outskirts farming, you just ran into the city, that wall would protect you. So if the wall's broken down, you're barely a city in this time. So he fortifies Jerusalem. He's building up the wall. He's putting towers on the corners, watchtowers, things like that. And then he cuts cisterns for his large herd. So he's making water systems, like big troughs, so that he can water the livestock. He loved the soil, encourages farming and vineyards. And there's a old commentator named Adam Clark, and he says, this is a perfection in a king. On husbandry every state depends. Let their trade or commerce be what they may, there can be no true national prosperity if agriculture do not prosper. For the king himself is served by the field. And that's fancy language to say everybody's got to eat, so that if you encourage farming and you can raise food for you and your own nation, you will be prosperous. Because if everybody's hungry, that is not how prosperity works. So this loving the soil and being kind of a man of the earth really helps out the kingdom at this point. Any comments so far? See, much like you, I feel like I'm doing all the talking. Go ahead.
Just thinking as we're talking about Uzziah's successes here, this really reminds me a lot of the period of the Judges, because Judges, there's the whole cycle of, they're good for a while, then they do bad, then they get punished, and they repent, and everything is good again. And now this is kind of an era where there's good king, kind of good king, bad king, and it's just ping-ponging back and forth, but it's still the same message from God. If you behave righteously and follow me, things will go well. If you go off and seek your own way, things will go poorly. And it's just amazing to me, all these things changed over hundreds of years. They got a king, the kingdom divided, and they never figured it out.
Right. You know what? Let's go ahead and stop there. That's a good stopping place. Yeah. We'll pick up here Sunday. Austin will teach Sunday. We'll keep going with Uzziah's good points before maybe the tables turn a little bit. Stay tuned for more. Thanks, everybody.